It's time we look honestly at what's really wrong with the American economy. The whole thing nearly collapsed from overwhelming debt and a crisis that began in 2007, and is still raging as I write this in 2009. It seems the economy will survive for now, but thanks only to maniacal government spending, funded by taxpayers. The long-term consequences of that spending are probably dire, possibly catastrophic. By most of the media's reckoning, the problem was that unscrupulous banks foisted bad loans on unsuspecting borrowers. Families were tricked into buying homes they couldn't afford with mortgages they couldn't pay, based on incomes they didn't have. Because the banks bamboozled them, went the thinking, such people deserved to be bailed out. The mortgage payment plans they agreed to follow were restructured so they could stay in their homes. Both the bamboozling banks and the bamboozled people were bailed out with taxpayer dollars. That's far from the whole story, though. The origins of the crisis extend much farther back than the bad mortgages of the early 2000s to the creation of America's consumer culture of excess, built on loose credit and mountains of debt. Responsibility became an endangered species, ravaged by ad-driven greed and instant gratification. Washington justified its enormous bailouts. Banks that extended loans to people unable to repay were called too big to fail, and the people who borrowed their way into homes they couldn't afford were called victims. For a moment, though, look closely at those victims, the supposedly poor people huddled in their supposedly humble shelters. The picture drawn by the popular story is of people in shabby clothes sipping clear broth in a pool of candlelight for warmth, walking miles to a bus stop to go to a job that breaks their backs over the years. That's what hard times look like to previous generations. It's not what we're talking about today. Too many of today's downtrodden live in modern-day castles, wear designer clothes, drive opulent vehicles, eat in fine restaurants, take vacations, showcase bling-bling jewelry, and watch big-screen televisions. They fund their lifestyle with mortgages they can't afford and credit cards they don't understand. They live the life of Riley to show how sophisticated and cool they are, but when it all comes tumbling down, they slink to Uncle Sam for help, not realizing that he's part of the problem. There's no dignity in that. It's shameful. Rather than whine for financial justice, they should hang their heads. Banks got into trouble by lending money to such borrowers and then transforming the loans into exotic investments that skittered across the earth like locusts. The loans and securities based on them became known in the media as toxic assets that the government had to manage. Thing is, those assets didn't spring from nowhere. They were the prickly green weeds above ground, but they weren't the roots of the problem. The roots were the borrowers, those who signed on the line to a payment they couldn't afford. The borrowers, not the loans, were the problem. Financially stupid people are America's most toxic asset. They fail to see the money-trapped society around them. They live in a world controlled by corporations seeking to extract as much of their wealth as possible, and the moronic masses open wide for every lure. They trust false promises of bought-off politicians. They sit mesmerized before advertising campaigns telling them to buy trifles they don't need using debt they can't repay. They stumbled on the path paved by big business that transfers their income to corporate coffers. They don't realize that the way of the world is not the way they want to live. Then they wonder what happened when they end up broke and hopeless. What happened is that they fell for the pattern, the easy route, the stairway to serfdom. They did not take control of their own financial future. They did not guard their wealth-building effort against the flim-flammery of a debt-based culture concocted by corporate boardrooms and made into law by puppeteered politicians. Do companies try to trick people? Of course they do, and always have. Take credit cards, for example. All you need to know about the credit card industry is that it couldn't exist if everybody paid on time. Profits come from people carrying balances at obscene interest rates. The smart people who pay off their cards every month get an interest-free loan. The morons who pay the minimum each month enter indentured servitude where every price becomes a multiple of its original value. Wake up, America.